do this. There we go. Okay. Awesome. How are you, Dan?
Hi.
It's
Hi.
Friday. I'm great.
Hey, Dan, this is John, John Lembo. Dan's a newer therapist with us here in Seattle. And hi, Lily.
Hi, I have my hands full carrying like my coffee and water and computer into my office, but I'll be on camera shortly.
That's great. And I'm recording because I know a few folks wanted to see this and couldn't make it. And John, we can kind of just get going whenever you're ready. So there we go. Are you guys seeing this all clearly? I feel like I didn't mess something up, did I? Okay.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Well, John, do you wanna get us going?
Okay, so okay. All right. It works. Yeah. Lily, good to see you, sort of. And Dan, welcome. Lily, I think you were at my first training. Dan, you can probably watch, they recorded that one too. So some of my concepts or how I conceptualize couples work, some of that what I talked about in the first training will kind of be integrated into this as well. And when I was first starting couples work, I didn't have like preconceived, like, I don't want to work with Fidelity or I do. It just came to me. And I think Lily, when I've had some conversations with you, you're like, yeah, like we ran into each other on the street the other day and she's like, I've got like 3 couples with Infidelity. I'm like, wait, what? So I thought, like, as I'm kind of trying to build sort of this curriculum around or like trainings around like intros to couples work, I was like, this seems like you're jumping right into the deep end, but that's the thing, like people are going to come in and you don't even know that this is happening. They may disclose it while they come to see you. Like I was just telling Rachel that I had a couple I was working with for 2.5 years and the Infidelity just came out like 4 months ago. So it was even interesting in tandem of like that coming out and I was preparing for this training. And so there's even a lot that like, because each time it's different with each couple and I'm learning so much about like what feels helpful and what ends up happening between the couple. Like, in some cases, like, yeah, I'm like, is this what I am supposed to be doing? So, but this will give you, again, like even from my first training, I just like to give some handholds. And then from here, you can climb the rest of the mountain however you want, right? And that's really what this is meant to be. Like, I'm wanting to give you just enough so then it feels like you can make it your own, right? So, as we're going through that, like bring that into this training. Like when you're thinking of like, all right, John is like bringing me this, how would I integrate this into who I already am as a therapist? So, infidelity, right? So right off the bat, what comes up for you when you hear that word? You can be in your therapist role or your personal self, whatever you want to do. But when you think of that word, I think I can kind of switch my hat on different things. Like if I had a friend tell me that they just got cheated on, I think I would have an initial reaction much different than if a client was telling me. And both of those exist inside of me, right? And I imagine they exist inside of you in some sort of way too, right? And that's right. So just what comes up for you when you think of infidelity? And any thoughts you want to share on what sort of you're coming in on, like, this is why it happens, right? Now that's not to say that's the same for everyone, but kind of like when you're coming in with, sort of some preconceived notions or beliefs around it. So just curious what you're coming in with.
I think of some kind of a betrayal of trust, like not necessarily what the outside world might consider like infidelity to be, but some kind of a betrayal of like an agreed upon component of the marriage or of the partnership or whatever it might be. And I think I'm phrasing it like that based on a session I had yesterday. But yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind is like we've agreed on something and someone has violated that agreement in some way.
but you wouldn't give it like that person cheated.
I'm wondering if I might with like my friends. I certainly probably wouldn't with my clients initially. But I think there's something even with friends, like as maybe you grow older, at least in my friend group, where it's like, well, like maybe some infidelity took place, but that doesn't necessarily like break a relationship, I think, for some people when you get to like a certain stage of life, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Look at infidelity, something similar, but more so like, um, because when you first think of infidelity, it just comes to sex. Oh, many people, it's just like the first thing is just sex. But for me, it's more than that. It's like kind of
Yeah.
like, sorry, the emotional connection you have with somebody else that is not agreed upon, especially if it's not like an open marriage or a poly, like something like that, where, so in the same lines of what Lily was saying, is that if there's connecting with somebody on a deeper level, and I think the reasons might vary. It's like if the person is unhappy in their relationship, or, not saying that that's okay or anything, but they've tried, if there was some sort of thing, but um it just really depends, on the situation, because as a therapist and I grow older, it's like people aren't just like, some people may be on Tinder swiping left and right, but like, majority of the people, if they're in a relationship, they really want it to work. And, it's like, it just depends, I guess.
Yeah, and I would say if someone's coming into your office to work through infidelity, they want the relationship to work, or they wouldn't be showing up.
Exactly.
Right? Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Really related to what you said, John, of the difference between how I'd respond if it's a friend or if I imagine like finding out Danny was unfaithful. Like I feel a very visceral, like punch in the gut, almost nauseous reaction, and it's so painful. And I can imagine, I don't work with couples, but I can imagine if I found that out, that might be my knee-jerk reaction before coming to like a lot of curiosity, which feels much easier to access in the therapist chair than it would in my personal life. So I'm aware I'd have a ton of bias, I think, coming into how incredibly my knee-jerk reaction would be like, oh no, this is crazy painful. This is not okay. And that would be a knee-jerk reaction that I think would, you know, have to bring a lot of attention to if it was in the therapist chair. Yeah. It's
Would
less
you,
expansive
to
than I
kind of
think.
like go in there just a little bit more, if that, just taking that scenario, like Danny was unfaithful,
Yeah.
how would you feel about telling people about the infidelity?
Mm.
Oh, I think well, I mean, it would depend on who. I think I can imagine a couple friends where I'd really want to share it immediately, like, I need you in this. And then outside of that, I think it would feel very private. I think I wouldn't share it with many people.
Yeah.
Trying to imagine, I don't know if that's shame or just a very protective. I'd feel very protective about it.
Yep.
Like imagine. Mhm.
Yep. So I speak to that in person because you were kind of taking on the role in this of like the one that got cheated on.
Right, that's true.
And again, there's some, and why and kind of even this just like sporadically getting thrown out there. It's very common that the person who got cheated on is in this tension of like protecting the person who hurt them, but but also like the isolation and loneliness that comes from that.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And in my first training, I don't know if I brought this up or not, but when I'm working with couples, and they're trying to figure out where they feel like there's too many people involved in the relationship or they feel too isolated, kind of what I always invite them to, who can you share your relationship with that no matter what, they are for you and your partner,
Mm.
right? They will feel that gut punch. They can be angry, they can be upset, but ultimately, they want what's best for both of you.
Mm.
Um, But so kind of just throwing that out there, as if you're working with someone with infidelity, like you're gonna feel that tension. Now, some people just like, I had a friend on Facebook that was just blasting her husband across the universe around what happened. That was an interesting thing to watch. But that's beside the point. But just, yeah, just speaking to that, that's gonna be something that's gonna be very typical around like the person who's cheated on, like, what do I do with all this pain? Right. So any other thoughts or anything anyone wants to share?
Yeah, I just jumped in, so I missed, I imagine, a good bit of the context for this, but I just wanted to share because I recently had, in a session with a client, been told about an incident of revenge cheating, and it was just interesting when there are, and I'm thinking a lot about situations where it's used in a way like sort of for the relationship or against the relationship, like it sort of has some kind of meaning to the relationship. I mean, maybe arguably it always has some, meaning to the relationship, I imagine. But in this case in particular, it was like very much, right, there's an idea of almost like a belief that I need to do this for the relationship to continue, which was really interesting.
Mm, mm. Man, there's a lot going on there. I can feel it, man. Because I'm just even thinking of someone making someone pay in the relationship, right? And how damaging that is no matter what,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But again, a couple I'm working with right now, I get often put in this interesting position where it feels like I'm often like, I have to listen to it. Am I protecting the person who cheated from the person who was cheated on? And I'm probably just going to use victim perpetrator, like in this, just to simplify the language, even though that doesn't necessarily fully fit here. But because I don't even, in couples work, I don't even really use those terms because they're just so loaded, especially in this context. Everyone's coming in so raw, and now like the person's already coming in like I'm perpetrator. Like there's a lot more going on there. Now, if it fits and it's really true, I'll use it if it's powerful enough. But anyway, I'll probably use that in this training instead of saying one cheated on, not cheat, whatever. But I'm often trying to figure out like, but the victim is so angry that they're unleashing on the person who cheated. And I've had to step in and kind of say, like, because what I always say, like, is I am the advocate, like the relationship is my client, right? So I could just feel if she kept unloading on him, the relationship wasn't going to survive that. And she would often say things like, he needs to pay for what he has done. And the hope is that you will feel better by making them pay. But all you do is pay them back. And what I always say, harm is harm is harm is harm. That's all you get. Harm equals harm equals harm. Harm plus harm equals harm. Right. So, but there's still this sense that that person needs that space to like in the first stage where you'll see that we'll talk about is well, we'll get to that. But yeah. Any other I'll keep moving forward. Anything you want to share as we go out, just bring it in.
John, before you move forward, Rachel, can I actually ask you a question? Is this, when this is being recorded, is it just going to be available to people at Self Space, or will it be available more widely?
No, it's just to people at Self Space. And if
Okay.
we can come to an agreement, if you guys actually feel like it would better serve the conversation for me to stop recording, then we can do that. And we'll just tell, sorry, people, some people did want to watch it, but they can miss, they weren't able to come. So
I'm just asking so I know how to like phrase things if I am jumping in with questions or thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it will just be available to our team if everyone feels.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So, in my experience, infidelity is a symptom of a greater problem. It's not the thing. We often find out that the relationship was highly vulnerable to infidelity from the very beginning. I'll tell couples, not just when I'm working around infidelity, but I said, we're going to find very quickly where the relationship was doomed from the start. And what I mean by that there's something that the relationship needed, that if that need did not get met, it was doomed for something to happen, right? So not so much like destined or something like that, but again, like in every relationship, you're going to reach a point where you've reached the limits of what you know how to relationship, so to speak. And in that, often you'll find like, because I'll often invite people to say, like, when you're doing couples work, listen in the relationship where you find the person not finding what they need in the relationship, so they're looking outside the relationship to find it, right? That's often one thing of infidelity. They couldn't find something in the relationship, so they sought for it outside the relationship. The relation, often what I find out in infidelity as well, is that the relationship was probably not working for either of them for a long time. So they were in not enoughness for quite a bit. And someone was probably tolerating the not enoughness. And then the person who cheated was sometimes like, some people who are the ones who cheated are kind of like, I never thought I would ever do this to anyone. There's sort of like some of that, sort of that stereotype, like once a cheater, always a cheater, or some people are cheaters and some people aren't. I don't think that's true at all. I think that's one of the myths that I often debunk. Now, if someone has a history of cheating on every relationship they ever had, again, that's not a character trait. It's often a symptom of having an avoidant attachment style. Because avoidance, right? Like if things get too intimate, they start to pull away, right? And if they still want to experience closeness without the commitment or the vulnerability, then often people who have an avoidant attachment style are very susceptible to cheating, right? Because they'll start attaching to lower stakes people to sort of try to feed that intimacy that they really need, but they want it to be lower risk. When infidelity finally comes out, it's not the ending, rather it's the beginning of, right? So I'm really positioning you like, when you come in, it's like, man, how do we recover from this, right? Like, am I just helping? Because infidelity is one of the most devastating things that can happen to a relationship. And we're kind of coming in being like, I don't know if the relationship is able to survive this. But if you're here, you're trying to figure out if you can recover from this. So we're on a very much of a recovery process in joining our clients here. And again, like I said, if the relationship was doomed from the start, this is often the beginning of addressing whatever that thing that was dooming the relationship, the thing that was never going to, get you past what you've always needed in the relationship. So I break this down into 3 stages. I learned this from when I first started at Self Space. One of the first couples I had, was coming in around infidelity. And so I went to my supervisor, Doug, and be like, all right, man, how do I structure this? Right? Like, this feels like a lot, like even for him, there was a lot of like, give me the handholds I need. And he had this like sort of 3-stage process, and it's not linear, but it's kind of like you're in one stage, and then when you feel like this stage is no longer enough, then you're probably ready for the next one. But then sometimes something happens and you have to go back to a stage, right? So in some stages, the relationship may already be at stage 3 when we learn about that, but often very much in the beginning, like stage 1 for sure, like you are camping out here for a while. So you're taking your time. You're listening from the person who has been cheated on or the victim, listening for if they jump too quickly to hope. I often say, like I said before, we don't know yet if the relationship can survive this devastating blow, right? But often the person that got cheated on, more often than not, again, like the people that are going to probably end up in your office deeply love this person and are trying to figure out, like, I don't want this to end. I don't want this to be the end of us. And so that jumping to hope is like they're trying to do whatever they can to make sure the ship doesn't go under. But there's a sense of if they jump there too quickly, it misses out on the stage of them being able to really express any anger, grief, loss. Like hope can kind of like tamper that down a little bit. Now, hope is always king in my book, but there's a sense there of like someone can too quickly jump there, and it's more of a coping mechanism than something that's actually helpful. So I try to reel them back a little bit and say, again, stay in this place of, again, like we need to honor your pain here. It's kind of be like if someone got hit by a car and the doctors are saying like, I'm not sure if you're gonna walk again. And I wouldn't want to, and that person's like jumping to hope that I will walk again. There's a sense of like, well, of course I want you to have that hope, but how does it not honor where you're at right now? What do you need right now in this moment? Because that creates this distancing. It doesn't create closeness. I have this in here somewhere, but you'll hear me say this again and again. Vulnerability is always the medicine. And someone jumping that quickly to hope is a real protective stance for them, and it may not actually give them what they need. So that's why I kind of put that there. So on this stage, the primary focus is on for the person who has been offended. It's space for them to catch up, right? The person that's been cheating, they've been knowing this has been going on the entire time. The other person just found out, right? So in some senses, they're just needing to catch up, like acclimate to the weather, so to speak. It's for them to feel all the feels and for their partner to witness and to sit in that feeling with them, right? Because for me, it's not about fixing feelings. It's about validating them, understanding them, being in them with the person. And there's a sense of like how the person who cheated, how they're going to work past and through shame is getting a better sense of sitting in the discomfort of what they did to their partner. And there's a sense of we're not trying to torture them. And that's where I was even listening. When I was in this stage with that couple I was talking about earlier, where there was just moments where the person that got cheated on, like they were just being mean. But I could see it was rooted in the deep amount of pain and devastation they were feeling in the moment. And so I had to invite something. Terry Real has this saying. He goes, "There's no intimacy in complaining. Don't call me out, call me in." Right? Call me into your pain. Don't turn your pain into a baseball bat and hit me over the head with it. Right? Now, it's not to say that when they do that, I just like, whoa, 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 stop. Right? You will have to be feeling for yourself, like, can the relationship withstand these blows? And am I just watching it happen? It's something that it'll be this sort of awareness or understanding that you'll have of this couple of like, what is too much, right? And so part of my work with the person who got cheated on is the sense of like, yes, you need to be able to articulate your pain, but not in a way where you look back and you're like, man, I just bloodied that person to death, so to speak, right? Like that's not good for them either. So there's a real sense of like, you're trying to figure out like and even when they're not doing that, like, am I looking at the person who did the cheating? Like, look at what viscerally you can see is going on them, because you're trying to manage it not being too much, but at the same time, not wanting to like quench what needs to be felt. So this is the part of the stage where I invite, what do you need to feel safe right now? Because trust has been burnt to the ground, right? Do you need access to their phone, to their social media, to their internet history? Do you need to like turn on location services on the phone, right? Like I actually hate all of this. Like I don't want anyone to have to do that. Like it feels like a lack of like independence. It feels violating. But there's a sense of like, this is always temporary. right? And that's why I put in there. What I'm inviting my couple to is radical vulnerability, right? You've been hiding. Part of the biggest thing about this, like the hiding has a lot to do with the person, why they cheated, and the hiding has a lot to do with the work they were going to need to do in the relationship anyway, right? And the other person is in just devastated by the betrayal. And in some ways, we need something more concrete, more even mechanical that I can hold on to now, while like the real felt sense of trust that will get built up is just deteriorated, right? Often the person who got cheated on, and I have this somewhere in the slideshow too, but they're often like grieving the red flags they ignored. And they're holding a lot of shame around that. And so sometimes they over calibrate to uh like everything is cheating again. And this helps them give something to go to that they can find some confidence in. It gives them sort of even sort of a manufactured sense of control over the situation. It's not real control. The person wants to keep cheating. They can outmaneuver any of these things. But it's almost like a peace offering from the person who did the cheating, of saying, I will do whatever it takes for this to work. It's kind of like we're in whatever it takes stage of things. And so there's a sense of like, we have to sort of manufacture some vulnerability here until you learn how to do that on your own. So none of this is permanent. It's there as long as it's needed. And often, as you work with a couple long enough, these things start to fall off naturally, right? But at times it's very disturbing for everyone involved. The person is like, well, I don't want to be like monitoring the person who's doing this. And the other person is like, I feel like a child over here, right? And I'm like, yes, you do. Absolutely. And so I'm not going to say you have to do these things if that becomes too much of a barrier for you. But what I'm saying is like, whatever you can do to be radically vulnerable, because as soon as you go back to hiding, it's going to get messy real quick, real fast. And we're just trying to keep everything out of the dark, in the light, so to speak, out of the closet, whatever sort of analogy we want to use for hiding.
John, can I jump in with a question?
Yeah.
I have a lot running through my mind, so I'm trying to like filter it through. I'm wondering how you might navigate this stage if, using the language you provided for the purposes of this training, if the perpetrator of infidelity was also the victim of other things in the relationship, like physical, emotional, verbal abuse, and to open the stage, like to open the floor to kind of, for the victim of infidelity to catch up or feel all the feels, might feel very threatening for the perpetrator of infidelity who's been the victim of physical and other kinds of abuse in the relationship.
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing this in, right? Like there has to be like we're navigating treacherous waters here. If there's some, right, and if we're on the boat being the relationship and the couple being on the boat, if someone in the boat is beating up their passenger, I'm not gonna go down those waters with them.
Past physical abuse, but that still feels very like emotionally scarring and present, but physical abuse is not occurring anymore and has not been for some time.
So a lot of what they are going to learn about what they need around the infidelity is going to help them there. Right? There's a couple I'm working with right now. They were having stuff that was going on in the relationship that was very harmful, very damaging. Not any like verbal or physical abuse or anything like that, but the relationship dynamics were not going well, even apart from the infidelity going on. Now, the infidelity was like sort of jumping on the back of that when it wasn't known and exacerbating it. But yes, every wound that the relationship is already holding is going to be exacerbated. And you'll, and in what you're feeling in the room with them, you know, you'll have to decide for yourself what feels like needs to be prioritized in that. But you'll also see there'll be sometimes issues that want to derail the more important work. So you're feeling for that too, right? Now you're bringing a big one, derailing like past physical and verbal abuse, like, but you know, like there's a lot in the room with that, right? And that's part of what this is. It's trying to help you just organize that. And I think it depends. Like, I think you'll have to use what you're already doing with the couple of like how that shows up, even what I'm bringing here.
Mhm.
But yeah, if they have a past history of verbal and physical abuse that has gone away, and then this issue coming up, are you kind of saying you wondering if that will return?
No, so there's past physical abuse, there's past and to a certain extent still current verbal abuse. And like the abuser in that instance is the one who has been cheated on or whose trust has been broken when it comes to infidelity. So it's very hard to make space for his feelings around the infidelity, because for her, what comes up is like, well, sure, maybe I did this, this was wrong, but also you've done all of these things to me for the past 10 years. So it feels like very difficult to make space for the husband in this case to feel his feelings around infidelity.
Let me see if, because there's something that I use often in my individual work in this, and let's see if this is helpful and you sort of inviting how to work with that.
Yeah.
Um, no matter what, you have to move towards what you need. You will not find what you need by saying, I did this because you deserved it. Let's say the person is saying, like, I cheated on you because you did those things. And I was terrified and I was scared of you. And I was needing to feel safe, feel loved, feel valued. And that's why I went and cheated. Fair enough, right? Like we can hold that with them. But right now, if we're on the path of healing and nurturing and care, it doesn't matter why anything happened, right? I don't go to the emergency room and they say, and they decide how they're going to treat a massive wound on my arm based on how it happened. Up to the point of where it exists. Like, was it something that, left contaminants in there? Like, sure, like there's some level of that, but they're more so like, this thing needs care, and that's all I'm going to provide it. So like why things led to that, that's going to come in some later stages. But in this stage, we're just addressing like we're in the ER and all that matters right now is caring for the devastation, right? But what you're talking about is when you get kind of into stage 2 to stage 3, which we'll get to, is kind of like what was here all along that needed care no matter what, right? But if we're in here like where all that stuff was going on, but right now we're just trying to focus on the most massive wound that is right here in front of us. But I'm always inviting people. I say my tenderness, my definition of tenderness is moving towards what is needed, not what is deserved. Right? Because if I'm moving towards what is needed, the relationship needs tenderness again. We need to get back there as quickly as possible, because as long as tenderness is gone, the relationship is suffocating under that, right? Like often I'm using a garden to sort of conceptualize couples work, right? And if you're not tender with a garden, right, it doesn't matter what else you do to it. If you're just kind of willy-nilly, just like stepping on things or like pulling roots out, right? Like you have to give that plant what it needs to get back to thriving, right? So there's, again, like I come back to sort of this nurture and care model of things. When someone's moving into like sort of scorekeeping or deserving or things like that. But that is something that's going to be need addressed, and you're going to see how the two are interconnected for sure, right?
Even just the idea that you said, like, about having to move toward what you need, I feel like that made something click in my brain about, like, oh, all of a sudden the continued infidelity and like continued violations or betrayals of trust, just all, as you said, that just like clicked in of like, oh, this makes so much sense right now. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Mm. Yeah, and anyone feel free, like, I can just get going and just jump in and say, hey, I want to say something or I have a question. So feel free to jump in. Let's see here. Okay. Stage 2. And again, there's not necessarily like this real distinct delineation of we've now graduated to stage 2. It'll kind of be this probably blending in where you feel yourself as maybe even, I found myself preparing for sessions around infidelity a whole lot more than any other ones, right? Because I'm like, I'm going to the front lines. I need some protocols for myself. I need to know what I'm trying to pay attention so that Doug used to tell me, oh, it sounds like your brain fell out, right? Like I'm trying to keep my clinical brain as from not falling out as best as I can. So there's not like a necessary like, oh, all right, now we're in stage 2. It's kind of almost like you're there and you're like, oh, we're kind of doing this, but you're coming in kind of prepared. Like, are we still in stage 1? Does that feel like is it still there? And I'm kind of checking in with the person, right, where the focus is on them. Like, do you feel like you still need space just for you in all of this? But stage 2 is now we're shifting our focus over to both parties. What did we co-create, right? How did we both participating in making this relationship vulnerable to infidelity? And you can change that vulnerable to whatever, right? And again, like this is where, the person who got cheated on is really grieving the red flags that there's always red flags they ignored. Like now they may be surprised, right? Completely. The other person may have done a great job of hiding it. And I'm not saying that they're like denying red flags they ignored. In some ways, there's even red flags that they weren't picking up on because they just didn't have the sensitivity to even pick up on that. But then once they come out, they're like, oh. And what I'm saying there is then that hypervigilance kicks in where that's why this happened. If I just would have caught that, then this would have never happened, right? And so even in that stage 1 part where we're kind of getting like, what do you need to build trust back up? Do you need access to the phone? All of that is trying to help sort of give a container to some of that hypervigilance that comes up. I'm working with someone on an individual basis, and they didn't answer their phone quickly enough. And their partner drove all the way from work, which is downtown, and they live up in Bothell, and was driving all the way home because he didn't respond to his phone call quickly enough. And like that's, and she said, and he was kind of reflecting back to me, I didn't have access to her, but like, it felt like that's what I had to do in order for you not to cheat on me again. And so like when you're in stage 1 and stage 2, like that is alive and well, like the protector is really coming up. But again, we're trying to find something for them that actually doesn't create any more safeness. It's manufactured, right? It gives you this power where you felt powerless to stop what happened to you, and you're trying to get your power back. But we'll have to help them find that in a bit of a different way through more vulnerability. But again, like my stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff, always. Everything in a relationship is co-created. Yes, you're not to blame for your partner cheating, right? But you are part of why the relationship was susceptible to this. This can be a hard transition for the person. So that's where you're really feeling, are they ready to hear for, how they are responsible for the state of the relationship just as much as their partner? Right? Because I'm always inviting each couple to not say, well, if they didn't do that, I wouldn't do this, right? Or if you would just do this, I would do that. I'm saying, no, like if you need something, don't make any excuse to keep yourself from that and bring the relationship with you in that. Because what you need is what the relationship needs. I'll say that to both people. What you need is what the relationship needs. What you need is what the relationship needs. And what we're trying to do is expand the garden, or sometimes I'm using a car or a boat analogy, right? Like you need an upgrade here. Like if there's not enough space for what you need, right? And you're trying to see if you can live without that space, right? You're making the relationship vulnerable to what that need the vulnerability it will create. So again, inviting everyone back to like focus was really on the person who got cheated on, and now we're focusing on both of them, right? There's a real distinctive shift there. Now that's not to say I'm not also still doing that in stage one, right? So that's why I'm even inviting you. For you, shift stuff around, move stuff from stage one into stage two, two into three, whatever, organize it, right? This is just gonna, again, just giving you some handholds of potentially sort of like what you're trying to work towards when you're just kind of like, I have no idea what's northwest, east, south, like I'm confused, I'm spinning here. This is to give you a sense of direction. But again, each of like how you jump back and forth will be unique to who you're working with. Time to get to know each person's issues with intimacy, right? When the one couple I've been working with, like they were having some like real intimacy problems, both on the physical intimacy and the emotional intimacy, right? When I'm saying intimacy here, I'm always using it as a catch-all, both of those. I'm never just talking about one unless I specify that like physical intimacy or emotional intimacy. But when I say just intimacy, it's all the categories of intimacy there for me. We're listening for what was missing from the start. What was I hiding or hiding from, right? And again, listening for what made the relationship vulnerable to these things. If I don't already know, I'm really inviting like how each person's attachment style is really playing into what happened. In my experience, and I was even listening to a relationship expert, that it's very common for avoidance to engage in infidelity, right? Just again, from that sense of like, um, I'm terrified of too much vulnerability, right? But yet at the same time, it's exactly what I need. So I'll find things outside of the relationship because it feels less risky, right? So that's that hiding from. I'm hiding from greater vulnerability and intimacy by cheating. I'm not cheating because I'm a bad person or because I don't even, or, you're often like, the person who got cheated on is questioning like, does this mean this person never loved me? That could be true. That could be what was doomed from the start. But most likely, if they're in your office, it isn't happening because the person did not love them. It was they were terrified of love instead, of like engaging in that in the level that was really needed to keep the relationship strong. So we're not questioning whether the person who cheated, whether they love the person, unless we're feeling that, like it doesn't feel like it's actually there. But the person who got cheated on, they're going to be questioning that throughout all of this. And so I use this saying of like dysfunction has function, right? So infidelity is very dysfunctional, but we're also having to listen to it. What was it actually doing for you that you need to find in the relationship, right? We're not saying it was okay for you to do that, but you were trying to find something you need in the relationship by cheating. Right. And again, it's always connected to deeper vulnerability and intimacy. Anything come up for anyone in this that they want to ask or share?
I'm stealing a lot of metaphors because I like stealing metaphors. But I like the garden, I like the ER. The ER really resonates with me because I think in the couples that I've worked with infidelity, the victim is often like obsessed with why. Like, why did you do it? Like from the jump. Especially when maybe there's been some time spent between when it really happened and when they made it to the therapy room. Because that time was spent without help trying to figure out why and they couldn't. And so from the jump, it's like, why? So I really like the ER of if we're still bleeding, let's tend to the wound first before we try to figure out why we're bleeding.
Yep. Yep.
But also I think I didn't answer earlier, but in the like what comes up for you in infidelity, to me, when I like Rachel used the language of like professionally having curiosity in the chair, like if I try to approach it with curiosity, to me it's unmet needs. It's just unmet needs.
Yep.
And it's where were the unmet needs? How long have they been there? How are we seeking to get them met? Why did we feel like we couldn't get them met in the relationship? And it's just all unmet needs.
Yep. 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 And yeah, the third stage you'll see is where we get to the why. But yes, like there's always a pull to that. And again, you can spend the amount of time there that feels like what is needed in that session, right? But you can say to them, we're going to get to the why. And sometimes because when they ask the why, when they ask the person, why did you cheat? They're like, I don't know. Not a very satisfying answer, right? Because and I believe them and don't believe them. I believe that they really don't know why, and I'm going to help them know why. But once they know why, they're going to be like, oh yeah, right? Because again, like our attachment styles are in this unconscious part of us, and if you don't really understand that about yourself, and then you start to, you're going to be like, ah, yeah, okay, yep. But you're even bringing up like in like what was needed all along. Like I worked with one of the first couples I worked with. Um, the woman had cheated on her husband um, because she felt she was living in an emotional and physical desert. She's like, I was thirsty, I was starving, right? And then now and so that was the need all along, that we needed more nourishment in the relationship. And so there was a lot of like, she needed a lot of being free from, I am a bad person. And that's why I did this. That's the only thing she could go to, because that's what the narrative that we're told the most. Like, I did this because I am bad. Right. But yet when the person has never even gotten close to this and to do it, they're really confused by themselves. Like, why the heck would I do that? But they can also name why they did it in the sense of like, I was starving and there was some food over there. Right. I was working with this one client on an individual basis. And when I was using the gardens and he was starting to develop an emotional attachment, and we named that he was having an emotional affair with a coworker. And I sort of named it like he had his garden. And the reason why was like there was things in his relationship that were very hard with his wife. And so when he tried to garden in their garden, it became really difficult. And it was like there was a gate, and you could go out the gate and go down the street a little bit and start gardening in another garden that felt much more fun, light, nourishing to garden in than his one at home, right? And so again, I could even not condoning the behavior, but saying like, of course you're doing that. Of course you're going towards what feels good, what feels needed. But what you did is when you find that outside the relationship is impacted by that no matter what the reason is. You're now taking time that you were supposed to be gardening with your marriage, and now you've started another garden, and you can't garden in two places at one time, right? I know that's a pretty sort of elementary thought that we think about all the time, but there's a real invitation there of like always you were going to have to try to figure out how to garden well together. And if that's the case, we can't, right? And infidelity is a symptom of that, right? I'm never inviting, I'm not putting myself in the position of in even infidelity work. And I talked about this in my first training. I'm never deciding for couples whether they should stay together or not, right? I'm always listening to what does the relationship need? And in this case, to recover. And it's through that, like how you both participate in that is what will get to what you need. Now, if you don't want to do that in the garden, you want to leave this garden and start a new garden with someone else. I will honor that. I'm not going to tell you to stay or to go. I'll just say, if you're going to stay, this is what is required to heal, to recover. and to move the relationship into what it's always needed to be for you, and each other, right? Like what you were always needing to get to no matter what.
Can I ask a follow-up question from that?
Yeah.
So I have a current couple where they're dating, they're not married, they've been together for about a year. About 6 months ago, it's a hetero couple. He cheated out while like drinking a lot, skipping a lot of context. She's now at a place of maybe kind of saying she violated her own boundaries because she told him from the start, infidelity is like a deal breaker for me. And then he cheated and she stayed.
Yeah.
And she's really struggling with it. And so
Yeah.
to this point of like, you're not going to tell them that you should stay in the garden or start your own garden. How do you handle a situation where she's very open to, yeah, do I want to start a different garden? And he's in a place of, oh my God, I screwed up. Please do not leave this garden. I am horrified that you are going to leave this garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's the question in there for you?
I guess how do you tend to sort of create space for both and kind of just be like, yeah, I can understand why you're really afraid. Like she might need to leave the garden.
Yeah. Along similar lines, that often also comes up when the person who cheated is saying, I think I'm going to leave.
Mm.
And the other person's like, what the fuck? You're leaving me after you did that to me? Right? It feels similar to that of
Mhm.
like, I always told myself I would never let someone do this to me.
Mhm.
And that was a false sense of control of saying that I can protect myself from ever happening.
Mhm.
Right. So I shift into there of like, we need to make space for grief around that for you. You never wanted this to happen to you.
Mhm.
And you fell in love with someone, let's say, I'll assume they fell in love. You fell in love with someone that did do this. And there was a sense of like, I told you not to do this, and yet you did. And there's kind of like shame on me. If I stay, shame on me.
Mhm.
Right? They're really struggling with that. Why would I ever stay with someone who did this to me?
Yeah.
And I tell them, I said, we'll find out. In a sense, it's like you don't have to, right? But right now, if you're saying I'm deciding to stay, right? You see how that brings me back to what is needed no matter what. As you are still deciding that, fair enough, you're still deciding whether you want to stay here or not. I'm just offering you, if you're going to stay, this is what you'll need, right? So I move back into that rather than helping them answer that question. Right. I said, of course you're considering that. I please keep considering that, because if you're staying when you really want to leave, that'll be the thing that dooms it now.
Yeah.
But if right now you're trying to figure that out, I'm
Yeah.
going to do what you need.
It's kind of what it is what I'm saying. And
Mhm.
it's incredibly distressing for him to sit in that space. And I mean, it just is, and that's okay, I guess. But like to the point where I think in our last session, he put his hoodie up and he scrunched his hoodie as tightly as he could because he just like started weeping at the thought of her being like, yeah, I am considering this. And like, of course she is. And
Yeah.
so it's just like letting that happen.
Yeah. And you use the word distress, right? And I think we can try to rescue people from distress too quickly,
Mhm.
because that's him grieving potentially.
Mhm.
If we take grief from someone, we're stopping the healing process. I mean, that's how I think about it.
Mhm.
Right. And so I'm kind of saying, of course you're distressed, right? Of course you're grieving. Of course you're thinking of like, man, if she leaves me after this is a significant loss, right? But there's a sense of like, he is in shame and I'm guiding him towards what moves him out of shame, because as long as he stays there, it's going to keep him from what he needs as well, right? But yes, that is, I know what you're feeling in that, in the sense of like when I've experienced that, and it's like you want to rescue. At least that's my tend to want to rescue.
And can I add a little thought of like almost his distress about the relationship ending is causing him to close off from the relationship? Like he can't accept her. She's in this place and he can't actually be with her there. He's closing. So it's almost like he's reenacting this distance in his desire to be close. It's such an irony.
There is a bit of a back and forth around whose needs are taking up more space as we're trying to get through this, as he almost crumbles at the thought of it happening. And then she starts to say, like, well, this is pressure for me to stay because he's going to completely fall apart if I leave.
Mm.
And there's even this logical awareness he knows. And so now he's in this place of saying, I'm just keeping what I feel to myself. And then she's now saying, this is a temporary thing. So now I have doubts he's trying to be the perfect partner and he's not telling me how upset he is. And this is temporary. So how am I going to make a good decision about staying or not? Because we're not actually operating in a space of what it's going to look like long term. It's fun. We're having a great time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Secrets keep us sick. Right? So, yes, if he's not sharing things or you're not sharing things because you don't think they can handle it, boom, that's where everything stops. Right? I'm always inviting, you are more capable than you believe. You can handle more. Now, like it's not like tough love, but there's an invitation, like when people crumble, like like, of course you are. Like this happened, like that's not, this isn't weakness, this is strength. Right? The fact that you're considering in leaving isn't weakness, that is strength. Like you are saying, like, I want what's best for me and I want what's best for you. But yeah, they're feeling, because that's where you're feeling like, whenever you feel like this sense, if I share this, I'm so afraid that this will happen. That's where that's the frontier of where the relationship probably has yet to go. And I've been holding that back.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's kind of like if you there's something about yourself you never disclose to the relationship because you're terrified that it would dismantle or crush, or the person wouldn't want to love you anymore. Right? Like
The
that's
avoidant attachment. Yeah.
keep you sick. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So stage 3, this is where we're really at this place of recommitment and are we staying together? If you overcome, like I'll tell people when we're in the starting, like if you overcome this, it will be so restorative. I'll even say, if you don't end up staying together and we continue to work together, you will find healing in this. You will find things you've needed all along. So I'm trying to leverage like why this happened for saying it's something you've needed all along. And so again, this isn't just an ending, it's a beginning of you moving towards what you needed all along. This isn't over, right? Like it's still a memory. I still feel it. But there's this sense of like the other person is getting tired of it being all their experience, all their thoughts, feelings just have to filter through this first, or they feel like they're just tired of holding it over the person's head. Right? But they feel like they have to, because if they don't do that, they're not holding them accountable. They're not holding them accountable, then it's going to happen again. But they've actually gotten to this place that doesn't even feel like that. Like they realize how manufactured, how that's just sort of a semblance of control, not real control. Where real control comes is from trust. And it's not really control. It's just a sense of like, I now feel that this isn't going to happen again. But that doesn't mean it can't. I just can feel the trust that it won't. I don't want to hold this over your head. You'll feel in the sessions and in the couple that it doesn't feel like it's taking up so much space anymore, right? That's what you're always leaning into. It's like, what is taking up all the space in here? And how do I help it shrink down to the amount of size that's more helpful? And so you'll feel like it's just not taking up as much space. And so you can kind of get, this is where you start building off the foundation you've already been strengthening and building in the previous two stages. And now you're starting to not just be in recovery, but now you're in building, right? Like, Gottman uses a relationship house, right? So you're building that house back up. We were already doing that with building some walls, getting rid of like, if we say infidelity was like a fire, cleaning out all the things that were burnt and scorched and smelly. But now we're sort of at the stage where we're trying to rebuild. In my experience, I have rarely gotten to this stage. Most of my couples, whether this is from my own, still like not being a good enough therapist here. And I don't say that with shame. I'm just kind of saying like, I'm always a factor in all of this, right? Maybe I didn't have enough to give them in that moment, but also there was just a sense of like, again, like it's very, I don't know any statistics off the top of my head, but like, I'm just imagining it that it's, I don't know if rare is the right word. But recovery here, it's people often they'll quit. And so like I don't even have a whole lot of experience in this stage, to be honest. But I have met people at this stage where they've recovered from infidelity, and I'm starting with them here, right? Like they're coming back to therapy because now, like, yes, the infidelity isn't taking up all this space anymore. Like they've really nurtured, and it's not like they're doing really well, and now they're kind of starting off here, and it's helpful for me to know the previous stages as I join them here. But so far for me, right, like, and I've only been doing couples work for 4 years or so, 3, 4 years. So it even makes sense, like even my swath of like couples I've worked with, like, right, I'm just limited in that experience so far.
Can I
Um,
can I ask a clarifying question around that?
yeah,
You're saying any couple that has come to you with infidelity has not made it.
they at least stopped seeing me.
Okay.
I
And
don't know what happened after
yeah,
that, but some people, yes, broke up and they
yeah,
stuck and they broke up, and either that's where they ended. They've said we've decided to go our separate ways, or
okay.
they did some sessions to kind of like do a therapeutic breakup, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
I appreciate you naming that because I
yeah,
think there's a lot of pressure on, and maybe it's just pressure we put on ourselves of like they're here because they're committed, and this notion, like you even said it yourself, like not being a good enough therapist,
yep,
like not in a shameful way, but just this thought of like, I have a few couples with forms of infidelity in it. And it's just like, okay. So just to hear you say like in 4 years, you haven't made it to stage 3, it's just kind of a bit of a like a little bit of a release valve to hear that. So I appreciate you saying it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amisha,
How?
oh, I'm sorry, John.
No, go ahead.
I'm just curious to ask Amisha, since she's the MFT of the group. Do you know anything about that? Like helping us normalize this?
Yeah, man, so many thoughts. Uh, John and I, we actually got to get to know each other a little bit when we went on that retreat at the beginning of the year, this past year, and we talked a little bit about couples work, and I was like really excited about you doing this, John, by the way. I missed the first one, but I watched the recording. It was really great. But yeah, the thing that we were taught in school and the thing that I've learned in internship, regardless of whatever stage they're in, either if they come in for infidelity, they come in for like even just regular couples work because of communication, whatever the case may be, it's not our job to fix them. That's like baseline number one rule, because that is a lot of pressure on us in that sense, because yes, we are therapists. We want to help because that's what we love to do. That's the nature of our work. But and yes, we do have feelings of like, oh man, we're kind of rooting. My one prophet, like my professor, she would like, who's the dog in the fight that you have it for? Like who are you siding with, like internally in your head, but you're not going to say it out loud. But the thing is that if like Dan, for your case, with that couple, if that woman is feeling that she needs to leave, and because it's not our job, like John said, it's not our job to like, and I reiterate this a lot in my sessions. I was like, it's not my job for you guys to stay in your relationship or not to stay in your relationship. That if you need some time to figure that out, we are here. I am here to help, but it's not my, like, either if it's individual or like couples, it's like I'm here to help you and guide you through whatever that confidence that you need for yourself, and especially where infidelity works with. So it's interesting that like, so it's yeah, some people don't make it because it's so hard, because they don't know if they're going to trust or not, trust their partner again, because of that work. Like, oh, you just did this and now will I ever be able to? But some couples like really are thriving. I actually just started with a new couple with infidelity, and they actually are at this stage, a little bit more so. And so yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not, in a sense.
Yeah, and it makes me just wonder about the variable of time. Like if people come in
Mhm.
at stage 1 and 2, I don't know how time is a factor to end up at stage 3, but I just
Right.
imagine building trust, is such a process that takes time and, trustworthy experiences together. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like they come to us in crisis mode. It like, in relationship crisis mode. And so like we see them weekly or bi-weekly. We're not gonna like, we can't take on that pressure. Like it's going to take time, this stuff is going to take work. And that's why I say we can't fix it mode, in the sense of it's not a band-aid. Like we're not going to go like, even my surgery, even though I hurt myself in January, I didn't have surgery until April, and so it's a long process, and the healing process after it is so long. So I'm glad I'm not the only one that uses metaphors, because I use metaphors all the time. So it's so comforting to know that other therapists use metaphors, just to let you know.
Metaphors is my superpower, I think.
Love it.
Feelings are so hard to give words to. Metaphors are like this, it's like painting a picture rather than like giving a dissertation or something. But I love the word guide, right? And what that made me think of is like, say you're a river guide. I'm not trying to help you decide whether you should go on this river trip. That was the marketing department's job. Right? My job is I'm the guide. You've already decided to go on this river, and I'm going to give you what you need to get down that river safely. So I'm measuring success based on how well I'm guiding them rather than the destination of where they will end up. Like that's not where I'm measuring, success, but it's not really success, because success to me falls into more of like, I don't know, thinking of it more in a capitalistic way. I'm thinking it more in like a care model, right? Like doctors, when let's say there's, something like, I don't know where you're going to end up, but I know what you need right now. And that if I don't give you what you need right now, infection would set in and sepsis would happen and we'd have to amputate or you would die. It doesn't matter like what will be down there if I don't give you what you need right now. So I love that sort of like that guide picture of like, sort of help, like inviting me to stay in my lane, right? And actually me staying in the lane that I do best, I give you my most, right? If I try to be something I'm not supposed to be, or I'm really not, I hate being there, first of all, and it's usually garbage for you, so to speak. That might be a little too harsh, but it's really where you're always working towards this, even in the other stages, you're giving the relationship what it needed all along. And it's in this stage is where that feels like what you're mostly doing, right? Again, the stages are just meant like kind of like if we're sticking with sort of this guide thing or like giving them what they need right in the moment, it's really these stages are telling you what they need. They're the stages of recovery, not the stages of success, right? Stages of recovery. Um, my job is just to get if I was a doctor, your body from this state of health to that state of health and giving what I know it takes to get there. Um, I'm just doing that in an emotional, relational level. So, um, Terry Real, he has this, like everything he frames stuff around is the cure for trauma is intimacy. Again, using the whole, like all different kinds of intimacy, right? I'm inviting you to go towards the thing that you feel the most shame about, cheating on someone you loved. Or I'm inviting you to go towards the person who deeply hurt you and devastated you. And that's where you'll find what you need. That's the medicine for this. But everything inside of you is probably telling you to run the other direction. And fair enough, right? But I'm telling you, if you join me in moving towards intimacy, you will find the cure for this. So that's the sense of like, it's yeah, yeah. What comes up for you all when you kind of read that quote, take it in?
Uh, so thinking of the same couple that I already brought up, as we were peeling back the layers, I was discovering and she was sharing, the woman in the relationship, that there was really a trauma response in thinking about the infidelity. Like quite literally a flashback was happening in the way that she was communicating it. When I look at his face, there is a snapshot that comes into my head of the story he told me about how the infidelity happened. And that was part of the stage one, what she needed. She said, I need details.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now she's actually living in a trauma response. She's getting flooded. She's having flashbacks. It's triggered even just from the view of him. And my sort of therapeutic neighborhood is often rooted in EMDR. And so I did some work with her to explore like core beliefs of self in that trauma response. And it sort of unearthed this really complex notion of the negative belief in there is I am unlovable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the super complex nature of the early part of their relationship is where her positive belief is rooted as well.
Mm-hmm.
The good part of this relationship let me believe I am lovable. And then in this, you also brought me straight back to the negative of I am unlovable.
Yep.
And so like literally
Yep.
trauma is
Yep.
where she is still living and
Yep.
why she can't heal from this.
Yep. 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 Trauma will attach to that part of us, right? If let's say you're finding out a story of she is not lovable, and this trauma wants to say, see, it's true.
Exactly.
And it was never true, right? So what you need, like when we're saying we're getting what you needed all along, was has no determination of how lovable you are, right? Just kind of saying what you're saying in a different way. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
fuck it. Yep.
And it was his negative belief, because I did both sides, was I am responsible for all of this and I failed.
Mhm.
And so now both of their core beliefs of self are rooted in the relationship. If we figure this out, then I'm not a failure. And if we figure this out, then I am lovable.
Yeah.
And so we just reached this point of saying, like, holy shit, that is messy as hell. If our core beliefs of self are rooted in the success of this relationship.
Yeah. Yep. Boom. Yep. 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 You're also bringing me into like because of course this is trauma and trauma work as well. I know for me, now this may be different for your all's sort of training or experience around doing trauma work. It's often individual. And why I love Terry Real so much is he's doing trauma work, but in the midst of relationship. That's why he says, like the quote that I took that from, it was a training on talking about trauma, not infidelity, just trauma. And so, and I can't remember if he said this like, and I just stole this from him or I like sort of made it my own, but I said, all of our wounding comes from relationship. So healing can only come in relationship, right? But a lot of trauma work is often this individual work that we do, which is great. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it's often like stage one of now I have to take what I've done individually and bring it into a relationship. And doing couples work is you're coming into the relationship and doing this work that you usually only do on an individual level and trying to figure out how the hell do you do this in the midst of a relationship. And I love it because it's again, healing happens only in relationship, in my opinion. You do not heal on your own. You're not injured on your own. I say, unless you were literally just struck by lightning or something like that, sure, you were wounded by that. But then we like, but eventually you had to get to a relational aspect of that and getting care. Maybe you have trauma from that. But again, there's this sense of like, I will give you what you need, that even if you leave this relationship, you're still going to need to find healing in another relationship. And I'm even giving you some tools or some things to look for in your next relationship, where if you don't heal from this trauma in this relationship, you will be healing from it in your next one or in your friendship or wherever else, right? But often it's right, like, because when we're doing couples work, um, of course we're doing attachment work and family of origin work, right? Because like where all our attachment stuff sits from our parents, basically our partners become that person now. It's no longer our parents, now it's our partner. Or I say the two places where our childhoods come up is in our romantic relationships and if you end up becoming a parent. Um, and not so much in friendships. Not to rule that not at all, but there's just oftentimes, so far in my experience, like friendships just end to be in a different part of our heart, so to speak. Um, you know, uh, a wounding from a parent is always just very unique. There's nothing that compares to it. A wounding from a partner is just very unique. Um, you know, I won't die on that hill, but that's how I can sort of conceptualize it. That when I'm doing couples work, I'm saying we're here to heal your. I remember talking with Erin when I was still at Self Space because she does IFS and um and I had just come from this training with that Terry spoke at, and he must be IFS, and I didn't even realize it. But I was just learning all this stuff of like, we're healing. Terry does a lot of like you're healing the inner child, and that the wounded self has then become your protector. And Terry's thing is sort of like, as long as your protector is there, it keeps you from what you need. Right. So again, these stages are kind of like honoring the fact that now that this person has been injured, they want to protect themselves. right? So in stage one, all right, let's give you the protections you need in order to engage these treacherous waters, right? Like if I'm the river guide, let me make sure you know what to do if the raft tips over. Let me make sure you have a life preserver. Let me make sure you know what to do here and there, because you need enough protection, but you have to get on the river if you want to get to what you need. So
I have a question. I see you're already kind of getting to that stage, but I had a question, and I did want to reflect on the quote that you just had, because the thought that came up for me was exactly what you shared. And it's part of the underlying principles, even with like, I mean, I mostly work with individuals. And the underlying thing that I'm thinking of that was bestowed from my program was, what happens in a relationship, or what's broken, hurt in relationship is healed in relationship. And I was thinking the exact same thing. I was struggling to figure out if there are situations where people are traumatized, where there isn't a relationship component to it. And I was thinking about like car accidents and things like that. And I'm like, there's always some amount of relationship component. So I'm glad that you named all those things. They're exactly what I'm thinking of with every client, individual and otherwise. Um, and yeah, I guess if this is appropriate, because I'm conscious this is training and not consultation. I just had an email from one a client of my couples just pop up, and I was just reading it and it was like, oh wow. So there's some present stuff that I'll leave for consultation, but I'm new to this work, and I'm already getting pushed towards having to do something akin to a therapeutic breakup. And I know you touched on that, and I'm curious, if you can elaborate from your experience, how to move through that space. So the context is it's very similar to what Dan had shared, except there is an infidelity in this case, but there is a betrayal, and then sort of like a trust period, like a second chance, and then another recent betrayal. And I actually, and I like what Amisha said. I think most of the time in my head, I'm rooting for the relationship to work out. Like that's kind of what's happening internally. I'm like, I want this to work out. I noticed a shift in me developing, and it's new for me, where I'm like, I think maybe actually this would be best if they did break up. I'm noticing just so many boundary violations and aspects of this that relate to like agency and abuse that I don't know if this can continue. And and I feel like it's going towards that. So I'm wondering if you have any advice or guidance on how to manage that stage of a therapeutic breakup and what that looks like.
really general, you're moving into doing grief work,
Hmm.
right? Like where I feel I do best in joining someone there, and there might be people are going to come from, I think, where you feel, what you naturally probably do with clients who are experiencing loss. They're ending a relationship. And so to me, grief is like always the path or the gateway towards healing, right? So if it's kind of like I'm helping them say goodbye,
Hmm.
if that was done in a couple's context. Um,
Oh, I should
but
also add that they have children, because that's, I think, an important component, that they obviously have to try to figure out how to, yeah.
yeah, so sometimes it's, yeah, what do you need this space to be as your because the one couple that I worked with who came in, they were already separated, and they were coming to me to see if they wanted to stay separated and move towards divorce or come back together. And this was another thing very early on in doing couples work. I went to my supervisor, and that's where even I was like, I don't want to be the decider of this. I do not want that role, but how do I not do that, but still be helpful, right? If they're kind of saying this is why we're coming, right? And some of it was like, once it got to the point where they're like, yeah, like we've decided we're going to get divorced, and there was children involved, there was a house involved, Are we doing mediation? Are we doing this? And our space became a place where they felt safest sharing that stuff with each other in the container of our space. I was giving no advice. I have no expertise in what they should do in any of that type of stuff, but was just trying to help facilitate them communicating that in a way that felt productive.
Mhm.
So I became a place that sort of helped contain things that, because often either one of them would get really overwhelmed and then things would decompensate. And I was kind of like helping create a container that helped them keep their mind to kind of work through these really, heartbreaking things when they were thinking of like custody and how to navigate that and letting go of a home that they loved and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, again, like in that, it's like I'm a container here to help you process and figure some of this stuff out.
Is there a way, because that brings up another aspect to this that I'm struggling with, again, new to this space. Is there a way that you approach, I don't know what the best way to put it, but like de-escalation or sort of like, winding down the level of distress that's been raised when there's moments like that, right? Or moments like what Dan brought up with the husband in that case. Is there a way that you do that that's sort of different than how it would be done in individual therapy? Because I know how to do that, but there's a new element here because there's a partner in the room, and so I don't know how to manage de-escalating somebody who's at a really heightened stage while having their partner there, or potential ex-partner, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, now you're kind of bringing in something that like, what do you do with when someone's dysregulated in a couple session,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And, it's obviously like we can do nothing until they're at a state of more calm because they're not going to access anything, right? Again, if I'm the river guide and I have someone on my boat freaking out and I'm just yelling at them, or not even yelling, trying to get them, you need to paddle here, or you need to do this. And there's a sense of like, they're not going to absorb any of that until they can actually absorb it. So there is um, whatever you would do to help someone regulate where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Now
actually
there
have a
is
friend-
this,
oh,
there also is this sense of like when I was working with the one couple of like, you are now not operating in a relation, like they had to redefine the relationship in the sense of like, we are now co-parents, not partners. And
Yeah.
so what you need and deserve from me is different now. And so we're drawing new boundaries and you're learning how like, usually, yes, you could speak to like, hey, you can't do that, so to speak. And now it's actually like, no, you have no right to tell that person that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mohammed, sometimes, oh, I was just gonna say, sometimes what I do, and I'm new to this space too, so I don't know if this is like the right way to do things, but I'll just be super clear and I'll say like, hey, partner who's dysregulated, I'm noticing these things. And then I will tell the other partner, I'm gonna spend a few minutes like focusing on this person and like help them return to the space in whatever way they need to. I feel like the more I name that, the more everyone's like, oh, okay, like I understand what's going on here and that's okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's at root of some of the things that I'm trying to figure out entering this new space of couples work of I have I guess like a presumption or like an assumption of, oh, I have to just make this 50-50. And obviously there's so many times that I'm like, oh wow, I'm really focusing on some person that is very, right, like dysregulated and needing a lot of attention. And I don't know how to address that. So I think, yeah, just simply naming that I think is helpful. Yeah.
And sometimes if it's depending on the situation, if it feels appropriate, I'll ask if that's okay. I'll say like, it seems like so and so needs a little bit more space today. Other partner, are you comfortable with shifting the focus?
Mhm.
They say yes a lot, not always, but I feel like usually just yeah, that seems to be helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. Rachel, you were gonna say something?
Oh, well, when I know we're at time, I want to honor John's
All right.
time. So I'm happy to hold my thought. And John, do you have any last thoughts you want to add in for?
I think that's it. Yeah, if anything was helpful, it was an honor to be with y'all. There's some, since you guys, I can share this PowerPoint with Rachel, and then you guys can have access on it on like your Google Drive or whatever. But yeah, honored to be with you all. Yeah, that last slide was just kind of like inviting you to kind of invite, like, do you still find yourself needing something more in all of this? But yeah, we're running out of time there.
This is so wonderful, John. I mean, I can just tell there's so many avenues we can go down in this, but yeah, really appreciate just the compassionate perspective. I feel like you create a space that really opens up a lot of room. And I feel that here in the training. So thank you.
Yep. Yep. And my hope is always, whether you're doing individual or couples, like, you'll see how you can integrate this into anything, right? Because you're always doing relational work, always.
Yeah. Well, like you
So.
said, the healing and trauma is intimacy, and that can be with self as well, intimacy.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Yep.
I failed to bring the link for the CEU thing, guys, so I'll send it to you to get CEUs for this training. So you'll get the form to fill out, and then Alyssa will send you your certificate. So super cool. And then, yeah, we'll pop this up. If you want to go back to anything, it'll be on the YouTube channel. And John, just thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your expertise and the conversation. So
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you.
Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone.
You too.